Thank you, Susan. We charge to play a more active role in our spheres of influence, especially in this more politically charged environment, is one we'll all think about as we move into our panels. So our first panel will be Young and Hip in a Digital News World. In a world of push-button publishing, today's journalists are faced with the task of preserving and redefining the profession. They must engage with audience and build community in innovative ways, and they must develop stronger, more insightful stories on different multimedia platforms. Influential journalists discuss how to survive a rapidly evolving digital industry that is becoming less and less dominated by men. We will have moderator Caroline Modarressy-Tehrani, I hope I said that okay. She is the host of HuffPost Live, where she's interested in women's rights, world news, politics, and religion. Previously, Caroline was the Culture Corner style columnist for the Financial Times, and she has contributed to the Huffington Post, Vanity Fair, the Telegraph, and the Telegraph. She has appeared on countless national TV and radio shows discussing trending news topics. She earned her bachelor's degree at Oxford University and has a master's in broadcast journalism here at Columbia. She will be our moderator and she'll be announcing our speakers. So over to you.
Thank you very much. And maybe if anyone who doesn't have a seat, come in. Feel free to get on in, come on in. You do not mind, I promise. It's early in the morning for that anyway. All right, ladies down. Yeah, come on in. Anyone at the back who wants a seat, come on up. There you go. Okay, well, first of all, thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction, Shara. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm my alma mater, and my Professor Betsy West is here. I'm just thrilled to be here and to be talking to you all this morning as well with some fantastic panelists. I've got to say, so the title of this talk is Young and Hip in the Digital Newsroom. I'm 30, so in my newsroom I'm a hip replacement than you, because most of the people in the newsroom of Huffington Post are about 22. So I just thought that was a funny aside. I'm going to get right into it because we've got a great panel of speakers. We're going to be talking a little bit about, first of all, navigating our ever-changing industry, and every generation is ever-changing, but I think in the last few years even more so. And also, of course, doing so in a space that's been traditionally male and still is, as we've had Susan talking about, overwhelmingly so. So I'm going to start off with Anna Merlan. She's a New Mexico-born and New York-based journalist specializing in politics, crime, religion, subcultures, and women's lives. She's currently a reporter at Jezebel and had previously worked as a staff writer at the Village Voice and the Dallas Observer. Then we have Julia Carpenter, who works in audience development at the Washington Post. She specializes in Tumblr and online communities. She writes about social media, tech, and gender outside of her work at the Washington Post. She authors a newsletter about historical women's lives. It's called A Woman to Know, which has also been featured in Amy Poehler's Smart Girls, which is really awesome. We also have Laughlin, who's a social editor at the Washington Post, where she helps, I love this, woman, the main Facebook and Twitter accounts. She doesn't just man them, she wants them. And she also specializes in enterprise storytelling on emerging platforms. And outside of her work, and this is a theme that we'll get to in the talk, outside of her work, she has a podcast called The Lady Cast, where she interviews cool women about their lives. And last but not least, Allie Conti. She's a staff writer at Vice. She has a background as a features writer for alt weeklies and covers criminal justice and characters who exist outside of society, either by choice or by circumstance. So ladies, welcome. Thank you so much. Great to have you all. And I want to start it off with this idea of the changing landscape, as we said. So Anne, I'll start with you. We hear a lot about that idea of the changing landscape. For you, how is it shifting in your day-to-day, particularly covering an election year?
Well, like Allie, I got my start in alt weeklies. The biggest change for me has been going, from an alt weekly to a website, which really didn't change my day-to-day work very much. I still do what I was doing for alt weeklies, which is blogging and writing features. But this year, Jezebel launched a politics subsite called The Slot, specifically to cover the election, specifically because we felt like there weren't enough places for women to talk about politics in a really stupid, irreverent, funny way. There was a lot of politics coverage that was very earnest, that was very sort of reflexively centrist, that was afraid to make fun of these candidates in the way that they really deserve because they're ridiculous. So it's been really interesting to see how your day-to-day work shifts in an election year and the challenge of covering, the daily outrages of Donald Trump while at the same time sort of keeping a perspective about the big picture. And I'm so thrilled that we're here to talk about how gender is playing into this election because it really is in fascinating ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And Alex, before we kind of delve into the gender-specific element deeply, I want to ask you about this. This is fascinating. So Marty Barron, of course, executive editor of the Washington Post, now I think brought to infamy with that film Spotlight, which I'm sure you all saw, just shows how brilliant of an editor he really, really is and how integrative he is. He recently told a conference that the paper hires digital native writers who don't even care about being in the paper, they care about audience. I was intrigued by this because certainly I think when I was still here at J School 2011, 2012, the notion of being in the paper, even though I was on the broadcast track, there's still that sense of it having this weight to it. How has that affected you in your journalistic career at the moment, this idea of the paper not being actually perhaps as important as it once was?
Well, the content that we do put in the paper, the stories we publish in print are obviously very important. So I am not necessarily a writer though, so that doesn't really impact what I do beyond knowing kind of what is our priority news-wise of the day. And so, yes, we care about the paper. The paper is important. It's our, flagship piece of product. I'm talking about it like it's a website, which I guess is the point. Because when we talk about stories that excel and stories that we're really proud of, we do talk about it in terms of page views and uniques and the audience that it's had the ability to reach on all platforms.
And Julia, obviously you also work at Washington Post, and this is, I think, an area where your skills and the intersection of these ideas, technology and gender, is something that you write about a lot. Tell us, in terms of what you're trying to do and in terms of the stories that you think are valuable to talk about, particularly this year, when it comes to that intersection of tech and gender. What are you seeing that's encouraging to you? Because I think we hear a lot about the negatives, right, about how women are still trying to break through into a space. What are you hearing that's encouraging to you?
I think the thing that is most encouraging to me is my work with Tumblr. So in addition to working with Alex and working on the audience team, I'm also managing our Tumblr presence on a day-to-day. And the thing that I love is that there's just this world on Tumblr where people feel really open about sharing personal experiences in a way that they do on all social media, but particularly with our Tumblr audience, people feel really comfortable reblogging us and sharing personal experiences or personal stories in a way that I think is really important in terms of bringing awareness to these issues. I was talking about this with Alex. When I do write, I write a lot of depressing stories. I'll write about, by the way, Google's algorithm is really sexist and you can't really trust anything you search. Or by the way, X person got harassed on Twitter and had to mute her mentions. But this heightened awareness and this heightened understanding that being vocal is okay, and dealing with the fallout from that is something that you can find your community who will understand and who will help you cope with it, I think is really encouraging. Yeah, it's something that's really important to me too.
Allie, talk to me a little bit about that, because at Vice I know you specifically are interested in people who fall within and without communities as well. Do you feel that women in particular are kind of finding a space that they feel safe and able to talk about the issues that they care about without feeling either in any way sort of stigma or shame, or do you think it's a little bit of a double-edged sword still?
Sure, I remember when that viral video came out a couple years ago that followed that woman walking down the street and getting catcalled, and I remember not relating to that at all. I remember being I'm completely immune from that, probably because I look like 12, but online, that's completely irrelevant. It's not true at all, and I write for a predominantly young male audience, and I write about Black Lives Matter, criminal justice, women's issues, so clearly there's going to be a pretty big blowback. But I think the number one rule on the internet, and I hope everyone knows this, is to just not read the comments. Yeah. I picked that up pretty early, probably my first couple of weeks on the job. The kind of things that spill over are in emails and stuff like that, I can't really help. I do see some stuff, but kind of try to inoculate myself to the worst aspects of that.
I'm curious about something, so I want to just flip it to the room for a second. Just a show of hands, how many women here have received some kind of negative or harassing tweet because of a story they've written or because of an opinion that they have put out there? Let's do a show of hands. Yeah, that's pretty much, it's like over 90%. It's nearly 100%, I would say. I think it's interesting to talk about this idea of not reading the comments, particularly going back to that idea of the changing media landscape, right? Talking about something like Facebook Live, for example, which we've been doing more at the Huffington Post, your whole sort of means of communicating with the wider audience is reading the comments. So I'll be live on air, for example, going through and looking at the comments as they're coming in, and it's unavoidable to see the kind of harassment and to let that filter through. Anna, I'd be curious to know, in terms of you and the way that you're writing and the things that you write about, how easy is it to have that rhino skin that Susan was talking about, and are there means and ways within your organisation that you feel that you're getting support in that regard?
Well, I do read the comments, even though I probably shouldn't, and I do at times engage with them, but it varies. So a few years ago, you guys might remember that Gawker Media, with the Jezebel parent company, changed our comment structure because Jezebel was getting deluged with not just threats, not just harassment, but extremely graphic photos of things that I won't go into, some of which I've seen since, but so we changed our entire commenting structure. So we have approved, not approved commenters, you can't see the images. And so that helped with the worst of, seeing photos of like corpses, outrages being committed against women. It helped with those things, but it didn't help with sort of the underlying issue, which is that the internet is full of people who need to do that to women who are expressing opinions or writing or just existing in the world. So that's an issue. A separate issue is doxing, is something, is actually getting your personal information put out on the internet by people who want to either harass you in person, harass your parents, harass your family, try to put your job in danger. And so that happened to me, about a year and a half ago. And so the things that I learned are, first of all, to immediately engage my organization, my editors, our lawyers, who had to go with me to file a police report, which was useless, but we still had to do that for paperwork purposes. So I think it's really important, though, not to just put it back on what we as individual writers are supposed to do when stuff like that happens, because it's always going to happen. Harassment, threats, doxing, those things happen because there are people in the world who, derive some small measure of joy from doing that. It's more important to be talking as institutions about what we're supposed to do, which is making sure that writers feel safe, making sure that we understand how to keep our personal information secure, and that we're going through threat modeling, with our writers, especially writers who write about lightning rod topics. But also to, have editors and, other higher level people who are willing to support you no matter what, and who understand, that if they get a deluge of, emails about how terrible a writer is, to either not respond to them, or if it comes to it, to issue a statement saying, this doesn't work.
Yeah, would you get on you to sort of pick up on that?
Yeah, because one of the first parts of my job at the Post when I started was to help manage the comments. I'm sure a lot of us have had the same experience, and people will when they go into audience jobs, is that my job was to work with comments product and email commenters saying they couldn't get into their login, and also deal with a lot of stuff that was really tantamount to abuse. But we talked a lot about this line that I think is still really incumbent on news organizations to communicate to writers, this line between okay, this is a hazard of the job, and then, okay, this is actually not all right, we need to do something. And that's totally what Anna was saying, that's a conversation that needs to happen as soon as you start reporting something. Just the other day, I actually was showing to Alex, Anita Sarkeesian of Feminist Frequency had tweeted a link to my newsletter, and as excited as I was when I saw it, I was immediately okay, I need to block and report people now. And I was showing Alex, and we were both blocking and reporting these people, but it was something where I was wow, this is something I do independently, and I don't have the backing of a major organization or institution to go to. I didn't know what to do beyond blocking reporting. Like, it's something I think that like we as a group should talk about more.
And I think on that note as well, certainly, whilst, you know, me at Huffington Post as an example, I had the sort of backing of an institution,
Yeah.
I think that there is still a learning curve the institutions themselves are kind of going through as to, well, you know, shit, how do we handle this? Quite frankly, I mean, you know, there's about, you know, when you get a barrage of either negative or harassing, or, you know, in the case of Anna was talking about doxing, when your personal information is out there, I think that organisations still feel like they're having a little bit of time trying to grapple with just what to do with that.
I was something I think about a lot is, you know, when people are like, well, it's kind of a case-by-case basis, and it's like, well, no, if you're a reporter who writes about race and gender, it's totally not a case-by-case basis. Like, this is something that editors need to be thinking about now. Totally, you know, totally what Anna was saying. Like, there needs to be a communication when you start at the company. Like, when you go through your ethics training and your HR training, it's also like, hey, by the way, here's what happens if you're doxxed. You know, you're a female reporter. This has happened to this person. We had this process in place. Like, I think that would be the most helpful thing.
Yeah, Alex, if you want to go for.
Well, I work less with comments. But I will say,
Facebook comments.
I do sit right next to our comments editor. His name is Teddy, and he's the most wonderful human. And he is just the most optimistic person about comments. And he's really working closely with our Coral Project team. So the Coral Project is a project with Mozilla and the Knight Foundation and New York Times to build a new type of commenting platform that's really much more engaging and involves a lot more moderation, heavily moderating comments and trying to kind of tend a garden in the comment section rather than just letting the weeds take over. But it's definitely an uphill slog to get there.
I don't know if any of you saw The Guardian recently. They did this fantastic piece of reporting where they basically did an internal audit of their comments. So they looked at the 70 million comments that they had, and they found, surprise, surprise, that women are the ones who get the bulk of any kind of harassing tweets, and particularly, tweets and comments, I should say, and particularly women who are writing in so-called traditional male spaces. So women who are writing in the sports section, women who are writing in the technology section, for example. Allie, you work at Vice. I think that certainly from the outside and from how it's branded, there's a certain element of sort of being bro culture in that. For you, how has any of this kind of topic of conversation, harassment, or a feeling of being attacked basically for what you're putting out into the writing space affected you?
What I kind of find interesting is that more so than when I'm writing about, you know, Black Lives Matter or women's issues, I've gotten more blowback and more terrible negative comments when I write about myself and kind of engage in the kind of bro culture that Vice is known for. I at one point had a column called Florida Stories that was just a series of personal essays kind of about like my like degenerate past in Florida growing up. And I mean, 5 years ago, Vice was just, you know, men writing about, you know, raunchy personal essays and drug use and stuff like that. And my much more mild, tame version of that in 2015 got me hundreds of emails every single week, you know, calling me trash, all kinds of horrible stuff. I feel like that is completely gendered. If a man had written that, it would have been like, oh, cool, Vice bro, gonzo, blah, blah, blah. But I got so much more vitriol for just writing about, you know, trashy kind of Florida personal essay stuff than I have writing about race or gender. So I find that kind of odd to be a woman in that very male space and trying to like engage in that male space. I get so much more hatred than for anything else, really.
And you know, I think one of the fascinating things is that we're at this point now where newer digital organisations and certainly some more established ones as well, for example, Vice, Walker, Huffington Post, we're in the process of or have just unionised. So there's that sense of the pay gap, which we'll get onto in a second, but the sense of safeguarding women and our salaries and being able to be a bit more transparent and making sure that everybody, when they enter the industry, that they're at least on some kind of livable wage, at least livable in this quotes, because we live in New York City, and we all know that livable is very different here. But, you know, Anna, I'd be curious to know in terms of how you see organisations evolving to actually take these issues into account and actually be better at being able to respond to these kind of issues when you bring them to the fore. Do you think that Gawker has got better over the years?
I was very involved in unionizing Gawker. It was really important to me, and one of the things that came up early on in our discussions about unionizing were, pay gaps, and were this sort of institutional culture that happens at a lot of places where people tend to hire their friends. They tend to hire big names for a lot of money, and there tends to be sort of wild pay disparities, especially at websites. And not surprisingly, those things frequently fall on women. So we had several instances of women getting hired for the same job and making a great deal less money. And so for us, unionizing was a way to sort of lay bare the inequalities that were going on and figure, not just complain about them, but figure out a way to fix them. So we set a minimum salary for everybody at the everybody in editorial of $50,000 a year, and now we have structures in place to meet with your editors and your supervisors every year to talk about what you're making, to talk about whether you need to be making more, and structures to get a pay bump when your job responsibilities change. Because that's another thing that happens, especially at digital organizations. All of a sudden, you're doing a different job, you're doing more work. It doesn't necessarily come with more money. So for me, unionizing is one of the strongest ways that women can make sure that we are in newsrooms that are equitable, that are fair, but also have pathways to advance, ways to get promoted, ways to succeed, that before were sort of predicated on your comfort level with your editor, or your friendship with an editor, or another higher up in the company.
Yeah, Allie, do you want to comment on that? I know Wise just went through the process too.
Yes, and I was very, very, very involved in the unionizing process, like Anna said she was. That was the very first thing that came up. I mean, people are afraid to talk about money in our society, so you're working amongst people all day, you don't really know what everyone else is making. When we kind of had to lay that all on the table, it became very apparent that there was a huge wage gap. And people that weren't necessarily down to unionize at first, once they saw that, were. And I do want to say that if there's anybody out there who's at BuzzFeed or something that wants to talk to me afterwards about how to unionize, I would be down to talk to you about that. I think it's the best thing that's ever happened to Vice, and it makes it a sustainable place to work and build a career, especially as a woman, whereas before it definitely was not.
I just want to do another show of hands. I like this audience participation thing. So, show of hands, how many of you have had a open, frank conversation with a colleague or an employer about how much you earn? Much less. And how many of you here feel that you're probably being underpaid or at least paid less than the men who are doing a similar job in a newsroom? Interesting, right? So, this I feel like is part of the first few steps to actually break that down. I'd love Alex and Julie to talk about that, particularly around, you guys have been enterprising around this issue. So Alex, tell us about PayUp.
Yeah, so PayUp is a Slack-based community that Julia and I have built, dedicated to fostering conversations about the wage gap among women in tech specifically right now. So my manager went to a conference last year, and he came back and was like, Alex.
He's a very good ally.
He's a great ally. He came back and he was like, Alex, I want you to do a project on the gender wage gap. And I was like, okay. So we thought about it. I thought about it for months, and then came to Julia and we were talking about it, and we were like, maybe this is finally the time to do Slack. Because we've been thinking about how we could possibly use Slack for journalism for a year. Anyway, fast forward a couple months. Now we have almost 200 members. They're women in tech because we wanted to start with a very concentrated group of women who did experience this sort of institutionalized sexism. I don't want to go all the way there, but I just went there. But
you can go there.
Yeah, it's a safe place.
Fine.
Yeah, we already went there. So these women just hang out on Slack the way you hang out on Slack at work. We have different channels dedicated to different cities that they live in, so we have women all across the country. We invite them to invite their friends, and we give special priority to people who have been referred by current members, so that we're really building an organic community that feels comfortable sharing. And we have had really, really frank conversations in there. It's been really cool. We had our first live Q&A with a negotiation expert, and we invited all of our members to ask to drop questions in a Q&A channel that we built for this negotiation expert, and she answered their questions, and we had somebody actually go and ask for a raise yesterday. So that was really exciting. Yeah, I don't know what happened. Haven't heard back yet, so we'll see. But it's really cool. People have really been supporting each other, and it's really exciting to see it grow.
Yeah, like going back to what we were talking about earlier about things that are encouraging and when it pays off to be vocal. Alex and I were both really impressed by the fact that when we launched this publicly, we had so many requests from women in media. We had specifically said we're going to start off with women in tech, then expand to other industries.
Probably 60%
oh
women
my
in media.
Yeah, which and it was so encouraging to see women say, this is something that I really want to talk about, this is something that I really need to talk about, and this is what we want. That woman that Alex just referenced who was talking about her race yesterday, she was turning to the group, like these women who don't live in her city, who don't work with her, to ask really specific questions about talking points, about how to negotiate, and it just really highlighted for us that we don't have a way to talk about that. A lot of us, I'm sure a lot of you guys too, don't have a format for how to ask for a raise or how to have that great conversation. I feel really comfortable talking with my colleagues. I feel really comfortable talking with Alex, but a lot of these women in this group have never asked one another what they make. They walk, one woman told me an anecdote about how after she was hired, she's an engineer, after she was hired, the HR manager said to her, it's so interesting, that guy that we hired at the same time as you, you came in and asked below market, he asked 20 above market. Isn't that funny? And she was like, no, it's really not funny. It's not funny at all. But yeah, there's just, we don't have a template for how to talk about it. It's really alarming.
And I think going back to that, the start of our conversation, the changing media landscape, part of that comes from social engagement editor. That title, that job title, didn't necessarily exist 4 or 5 years ago. So you don't necessarily have a benchmark or that sort of person in your organization who may be the mentor in that same role to say, hey, how much should I have asked for? Or when they said 50,000, should I have looked at them and laughed in their face and said, are you kidding? There are these kind of elements of the changing landscape which directly then correlate with the gender gap that we see, particularly women in media. Anna, talk to us a little bit more about what you've seen in terms of these kind of conversations. Do you think that talking to your colleagues is actually the best way of trying to improve the situation? Are you for that kind of radical transparency that we saw last year with somebody who left Google but then created this fantastic spreadsheet where she asked everybody to put their job title and then their salary in?
Yeah, and we're seeing so much of that, especially for freelance writers that we haven't talked about a lot in this space, but for freelancers creating, listservs, email groups, spreadsheets that show what outlets pay, what they will offer, and what you should ask for when you're pitching somewhere, which is really important. And we try to do the same thing internally, among the women at Gawker, talking about what we're making, and it's really hard. It's really hard to have those conversations. There's all this socially ingrained stuff about not talking about money, but that's how things stay the same, So the only way to counter it is to discuss it, and I've been so encouraged to see those conversations happening more and more openly. The other thing about it is an element of public shaming. If, for example, if you are a freelancer and you have not been paid for 6 months by some big deal outlet, it's nice that there is maybe now a way to talk about that is not just sort of a bridge burning, sending an angry email to someone that you have been pestering with emails to pay you for months. There's way more transparency about money issues, and it can only be a good thing.
Yeah, Allie, do you see that same sense of transparency actually changing things for you beyond just the union?
Oh, I was going to harp on the union again, but I do think it's important. You mentioned that you guys have salary floors now, and so do we. So we
saw that.
Right. So when somebody tries to apply for a job, as a staff writer in a digital space, and they have no idea what to ask for, and that's widely publicized, that's at least a benchmark for them to know. If you're going to offer me $30,000 for this job, no. And they have direct competitors that they can look at and actually have, a benchmark. And I think that's going to change a lot going forward, because I had no idea what to ask for when I took this job. I was the only person with this job title at this job, and didn't know anyone else with a comparable job. So I think I probably got screwed because I didn't have anything to look at, and I don't think that'll happen going forward.
I think that the other aspect of this conversation that is probably important for people today as well is that whilst we're all here as members of rather well-known organisations, we're all told, aren't we, about cultivating our personal brands. Every single person in this room, if you have a Facebook account, if you're on Twitter, or if you're on Snapchat, you are a brand. You have a brand, whether you'd like to think so or not, and that is something that is important to not only cultivate, but can actually then also directly impact not only the sort of jobs that you can get, but also then the kinds of money you can ask for. And more, I know from my own experiences, and certainly anecdotally as well, that people, when they're looking to hire, are asking, well, how many social media followers do you have? What's your Facebook engagement like? What are all of these things? So, Allie, I'll start with you again. In terms of your personal brand, I mean, how much do you think of you as a brand when you're just, on your day-to-day, in your job and then outside of it?
Oh man, I don't. I'm like kind of a Luddite. If I could just not have Facebook or Twitter or any of that, I probably wouldn't. And I think it's really hard, especially as a generalist. Like if you have a specific beat, it's easier to kind of build up your brand. But if you're writing about such disparate topics every day, it's kind of difficult to figure out how to market yourself. I actually haven't really figured out the answer to that. So if someone has a great answer, I'd be willing to listen to your advice.
Yeah, well, Anna, talk to us a little bit about the dual difficulty, I guess, of not only trying to start thinking about your personal brand, but also then working against the grain where you are in an organisation that has such a strong sense of brand identity already.
My personal brand is how did she get in here? What is she doing here? I'm sorry.
Anna, no! It's so bad to think that way. That is the thing, right?
I find the whole idea of personal branding really alarming. I find it weird that we're being encouraged to think of ourselves as products, and I have thoughts about that in late stage capitalism that we'll leave it for the bar. But that being said, I have a Twitter that I think of as primarily that functions to share my work and to talk to other journalists, and so there, I suppose, are things that I do or don't do within the context of my Twitter that I think of for professional advancement. But yeah, as Allie says, as a generalist, it's not really possible to specifically brand yourself in a certain way, but it is a way to talk about what you're good at, So for the first time a couple months ago, I made myself a website and, gave myself a very sort of general bio and shared some of the work that I'm proud of and, just gave people a bite-sized idea of who I am and what I do and what I'm capable of. And so as far as that is concerned, I suppose that has been an exercise in personal branding for me.
I also find it disturbing. I didn't know if I was allowed to say that.
You can totally say that. Well, I mean, I think that it's interesting to me, the sense of branding and the idea of putting ourselves out there. I find it extremely difficult as well. And I remember having a conversation with the executive editor at the organisation I work for, and saying, okay, what do you care about though the most? I'm like, well, today I care about what's going on in Saudi Arabia, and yesterday I cared about this specific gender pay gap issue, and I felt a little bit in that way because I think that we're all taught almost to be generalists, right? And particularly now we're exposed to issues in a way, thanks in large part to social media, where we feel that we're enabled to be informed about different issues. But it reminds me of going into a job application, and where women, if they have 10 out of 10 of the prerequisite markers on the job application, maybe they'll feel inclined to apply for that job. But if a man looks at the job application, sees 10 bullet points and says, I got 2 of those, I'm fine, I'll apply. And this sort of goes back, I think, into this conversation about putting ourselves out there and feeling comfortable to do so. So Alex, I know you have a side project, of course, the Lady Cast. So how much of your own outside projects and side projects and personal branding do you focus on, and how much of a portion of a day or a week do you think about that?
Well, I definitely don't sit around with a notebook and be like, what is my personal brand going to be? But it's sorry, I did that. I think it's just kind of the story that you tell about yourself. And for me, that tends to be a lack of filtering. And so, talking about, my psychological issues with Hamilton and how I talked to my therapist about it. is something that I feel like is very in line with my brand, but is not necessarily professional. But I feel like that authenticity is something that I'm chasing, and so what's icky about branding is that it feels really, really fake.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we all kind of get eye-rolly when we talk about personal brands. But I guess it's only fake if you make it fake. So if you're searching after and like trying to make this brand about yourself and designing a logo for you, like there's only one Prince, and he died. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm gonna go away from that. I spend like 4 hours a week on my podcast, and I definitely had to ask permission from my employers when I started it. So that was something that I had to consider. Was how, like, yes, it's my side project, but it does reflect on the Washington Post in some way, and I had to consider that. And so that's something that I think about whenever I'm doing my work is like, yes, this is me, but it's also kind of a finger off of the hand of the arm of the Washington Post. On top of that, my dad gets all of my tweets sent to his phone, and so that's a pretty good filtering mechanism.
I'm not going to use the word brand anymore, I'm going to use the word voice. Because I feel like everyone's more comfortable with the idea of voice because it's not synonymous with necessarily that sense of like brand, like your Cheerios. So, in terms of the importance of people in this room who maybe are not within the journalistic professional sphere yet, but that are soon to be, how important is having a voice, not necessarily just within the organisation you work in?
I think voice, so when we were all talking about branding, I was like, when it gets to me, I'm going to use the word voice instead, because I think that my voice is something that is really important to me that I'm still really figuring out. Like, I'm sure a lot of you are the same. And so when I'm thinking about who I am outside of WAPO, I pretty much think about that all the time. Just because it's, Alex and I have a specific experience in that we both also run social accounts that are tied to, we run literal brands, like when I'm doing the Washington Post Tumblr, I'm not blogging as me, I'm blogging as WAPO, and so distinguishing that and like really thinking about my voice and who I am separate from that on Tumblr, on my personal Tumblr is really important to me. The most empowering thing to me, I think, is that like myself and all of my friends, maybe like 5 years ago, we were all like freaking out about what we tweeted about and worried about what we tumbled, and now we feel this sense of freedom to really just be ourselves. And like, I tweet a lot about crying at work, and one time my boss was like, I didn't realize that you cry so much at work. And I was like, well, I'm glad that you know, like, it's at least like, this is one way that you can figure it out. But I feel like I'm also really lucky in the sense that I haven't had an experience where a boss has said to me, delete those tweets, or like, be careful what you tumble. And that's an experience that I haven't had.
All right, well, we want to do a few minutes of Q&A as well, just a couple of questions. If anyone has a question, come to the mic, do not be shy.
Hello, thank you for being here. So this summer, a senior editor at Medium published an article about how the majority of social media editors are women. And yet, when it comes to writers and editors and higher level personnel, they're predominantly male. Given how increasingly important social media is within a news operation, how do you think this will affect women in this role, especially those who have aspirations to ascend the ladder?
Yeah, this is something, Alex just listening, because this is something I think about a lot, and it's something I talk about at work a lot, where I've only ever worked in audience jobs, and I've actually only ever worked full-time at the Post. I got a job there out of college, and I worked before in magazines and at, broadcasts and websites, and I had always there was this blurred line between writer and social there, and you're seeing those jobs so much more where you do social part-time, and you also do writing part-time. And I think being really, for me at least, finding the permeability of those walls, I see it being broken down more and more and more, but being so open about your aspirations and so open about what you enjoy doing and what you don't enjoy doing is the good thing. So it's I still, my first year I still did a lot of comments work. I also did a lot of writing, and that was coming out of me saying, hey, these, it looks like I am being put in this lane that isn't the most fulfilling for me. But it's definitely something I think about a lot, especially with women. I go to social media conferences and it's all ladies. I don't have an answer as much as just like me being like, I read that Medium article too, and I also started talking about it. But I think that like the more that we have those conversations and the more that we plot these digital paths forward is important, because like especially my job, I've had 4 different titles. There's no like one after for me. There's not been another person in my position who's one more, and so being open and saying like, this is what I see for this, like this is what I see, whether it's like writing more or like experimenting with Slack more, or like this looks like a job for me, envisioning future job roles and envisioning future job descriptions and talking about them nonstop is really the only path I see forward. But yeah.
Can I also hop in?
Yeah.
So I had a lot of feelings when I read that, because it was really fascinating, and it's something that's really true, that like we do see that in newsrooms right now. But I also really resent the idea that a social media editor should be an entry-level person.
Totally. Yeah.
Because not all young people are good at social media, not all young people like social media, and not all older people are bad at it or don't like it. And I think that up until this point, the audience side of the newsroom has been seen as sort of an afterthought, a second tier, like this is where the new people go so that they can get familiar with the content.
This is where the young people
Yeah,
go.
this is where the young people are, and like that's very much true in every newsroom I've worked in. And I think that when we begin to see the people who specialize in building communities and developing audiences and experimenting on platforms, when we see them as experts, that's when we'll begin to see them as leaders. And the women who are in those roles will be leaders too. And also, like, women won't be ghettoized into this second tier role in the newsroom.
Yeah,
experts at what? Marketing or journalism?
It's both.
Well, something Alex and I talk about a lot actually is how social is a craft and community building is a craft.
What we're doing on Slack isn't marketing.
No, it's totally.
It's something new.
It's funny because we were talking to a bunch of high schoolers once, and all of their journalism ideas weren't being housed. They weren't like articles that just live in article pages. They were instead different like Instagram projects or telling stories through like other social platforms. But I found that really inspiring and encouraging.
Also, social editors get our work read. They're
Yeah.
how people get their eyeballs on our work. It's crucial. And so instead I see this sort of an updated version of women going into PR, this sort of, pink ghetto, as people always refer to PR. And so, yeah, I think, it's really important for people to understand that social editors and engagement editors, do something, which is putting work forth in this huge, cacophony of noise. And yeah, I see it not being taken as seriously as it should be as a profession, which is because it is dominated by women. And any profession dominated by women gets diminished.
Yeah, I'm going to just say, because there are a lot of more people running out of time, so if we can continue that conversation after this panel, but yeah, you go for it.
Yeah, I actually have the same question, but I'm going to ask another one. So I'm just wondering, like, in terms of mentorship, because I've talked to a lot of women journalists, and most of them told me that their mentor were actually male. So I'm just wondering, like, if you could share your experience and how to deal with, like, this, problem or phenomenon, and, like, were you mentors, like, male as well? And how do you deal with the, like, your relationship with a female mentor?
Allie, do you want someone? Or?
Yeah, I've never actually had a female mentor. My old paper that I worked at in Miami, I was the only woman, and I think I'm the only woman at Vice.com right now that's not in a predominantly marketing role. So I don't know the difference between having a male and a female mentor at all, and that's actually kind of blowing my mind because I never actually realized that until I said it out loud. But yeah, I never had to navigate the difference. Only ever worked with men.
This is something I think about a lot because totally what Allie just said too. Like I haven't had a lot of mentors, period. And something Alex and I talk a lot about is because totally related to that first question, peer mentorship has become really important for me. So I feel like a lot of people I turn to for those same questions that, more traditionally I would have turned to like a cool lady editor who like has X number of years of experience. Instead I turn to my peers and ask them, and it's more of this like horizontal system of mentorship. That's at least always been my experience.
Well, there's going to be a panel on mentorship as well coming up. So I think if we've got one more question.
Yeah, no, just sorry to cut off people's questions, but thank you